Hey everyone, I've gotten a few requests to post my build. It's a Spark Invoker with a weapon swap to Eye of Winter cast on crit Comet for bossing. In terms of what main skill we're running, it's for clear we're running Spark. This is nothing special. We're using like these supports here. I'm doing this all in one take, so if this gets really rambly, it's because it's not rehearsed or structured or anything. These are just some support skills. Some Frostwall is kind of like my Xeshit skill to get me a bit of distance from any mobs that jump me. Orb of Storms is a nice structure that gives us font of mana, because we're definitely going to need it for the Eye of Winter cast on crit setup. Then we also run Elemental Invocation. This is just extra. If you just have the spirit to run this, then it's nice to run it when you're running Spark. As you can see, it turns on my Grim Feast and Elemental Invocation. We're of course running Archmage because GGG gave us no ways to scale spells past percent increases, so kind of have to run Archmage on every spell build if you want it to be even semi-viable. And even my build is not that good for clear. For our defenses, we're also running Blasphemy with Temp Chains, because Temp Chains is really, really good with an increased AoE. And then this is also extra. You do not need to run Herbalism. This is just nice because with the passive Keystone of Eternal Youth, it gives us just a bit more ES healing from our Life Flask. And finally, we also run Clarity here because Blasphemy is the aura that we're still running when we swap weapons to Eye of Winter, so we just throw it in here. Plus it also has reduced reservation, so it makes this Clarity and this Herbalism cost less than if we were to have it in Archmage, for example. And then in the cast on crit setup, very standard. Comet is still only level 18. I have no level 20 gems, haven't found any, and haven't found it to be worth to buy them, so I just didn't. Comet, level 18, 20%. Spell Echo, just freest extra damage because the cast speed doesn't affect it, and then there's extra AoE, so it just makes it deal double damage every time. Conk effect, 40% more damage. The less area of effect, it ends up being 20% less area of effect with the Echo, and the standard is also 50% less. Doesn't really matter, we're using it on bosses. Bosses in this game don't really jump around, so, or at least not yet. So you can just, the AoE doesn't matter. Inspiration, because this will trigger, this ends up costing more than the Eye of Winter itself, so we put Inspiration on here. This makes these quite equivalent. And then Impetus. Here you can also run energy regeneration. This just makes it very consistent how much energy you gain. This makes it a bit more sporadic, and I found it was a lot less, how do you say? Oh, by the way, that was me. That was my notification. Furthermore, just makes, for me, it made more sense to run Impetus. Yeah, and then the Eye of Winter, we're just running as much support in Eye of Winter as possible, because the damage from Eye of Winter barely matters. It does matter, apparently. According to what the skill gems say, the damage of the hit does matter into how much energy it generates, but you'll see that it doesn't matter as we're burning through our mana so fast that there's no point of even trying to get more damage. So what we're running here is mobility. Just makes it nicer so we can cast while moving and we're not super slow. Arcane Tempo, more cast speed, so we get more procs. Arcane Surge, because since Eye of Winter costs more than Comet, we want it on this skill. Otherwise you would just swap Arcane Surge for Inspiration and just swap between the two skills. Finally, we throw Blind on here because we are evasion based. So this basically turns our 72% into like 80% against bosses if the calculation is similar to PoE 1. So that's nice. And it is hunt, so enemies will just always be blinded. And then finally, this is just flex. I had no idea what else to put in here, so I put in Extraction. Extraction, if you're CI, costs nothing. You don't sacrifice any of your life because 10% of 1 is still 0 in the game's eyes, so it's just 25 extra chaos damage. which is nice if for some reason enemies, like a strong rare has like ES or something. So the reason why we don't run Eye of Winter by itself as our only ability is because they nerfed cast on crit so hard against anything that isn't a unique. It kind of works against rares, but with Spark Archmage, you kill most rares fast enough that it doesn't matter. Oh yeah, another thing I forgot to mention, we are running Call of the Brotherhood to convert 50% of the damage to, I mean it is 100%, but Archmage adds the lightning afterwards, so it ends up being like, Archmage is like two-thirds of the damage and the other 1/3 is cold, which is nice because then we can actually freeze stuff. Also good for proccing Elemental Invocation while clearing. So, and basically, in terms of like gear, just standard evasion ES stuff with Monk, using this to get a shit ton of spirit. That's why I have 271. Before this I had 230. So what you would end up dropping is basically you would drop Herbalism, and you would probably drop, you either drop Herbalism or you drop Elemental Invocation. Yeah, you just drop Elemental Invocation actually. I'm not running Ghost Dance anymore. So yeah, you just drop Elemental Invocation, and if you have enough space for that, you just pop in some other small aura that can benefit you. There'll probably be more auras soon anyway, with new updates anyway, and then that'll fill the gaps. Elemental Invocation is just basically while you're clearing and you see like a rare mob that's a bit stronger, you can just tap it and it'll just summon like 4 comets and just absolutely nuke that rare. Really nice. The reason this one's level 19 is because we're only casting it every now and then, so it ends up being pretty easy to stay up on mana. And while you're clearing, I do have a few mana on kill jewels. These are quite well rolled. These would be quite expensive to buy just straight up. So I would just get like an ES plus mana on kill. That just gives you some defense. Yeah. So if we check Eye of Winter, the reason why we use Eye of Winter, if we can see here, we have a critical hit chance of 52.2%. This is because Eye of Winter has a base crit chance of 12, but it inflicts out critical weakness. And critical weakness applies a base crit chance of 10% when it's fully stacked, which is basically instantly against a boss, because Eye of Winter will hit like 20 times almost instantly, and it'll be fully maxed out, which would then cause its 12% crit chance to be increased to 22%. And then if we basically do the math backwards, basically, how do we get to 52.2% divided by 12%? That'll give us like quick math. It's like 420% crit chance is what I probably have. 420% increased crit chance. And then if we multiply 420 times 22, that gives us up like 96% crit chance. So when Elemental Weakness is stacked, we are almost at 100%. We don't want to be at 100% because Comet itself has a higher base crit of 15% with quality. So if you're like at 90% on Eye of Winter, your Comet with quality will be at 100% when they hit. So, and there's also, I believe there's a few nodes on the tree that give you increased damage if you haven't crit recently. Yeah, there's like this one. So this is just, I get 25 crit multi if I haven't crit recently. So it's nice to not be at 100% crit chance. I believe that is the only node though. So if you hit 100% crit chance, just don't even pick this node up. Even though it has 20, I mean it does have 20% crit chance innate, so it's still kind of good. But maybe there's like a better node to pick up. But I don't think there's much else on the tree. I'll link a planner in the description with the actual tree because it's kind of hard to see. Especially because we're using all 24 points of the weapon swap. And I'll show exactly what I mean by that. I don't think there's anything else that's really special here. Yeah, and Ice Wall's just here for like an oh shit button. Like all of a sudden there's like 3 rares on top of me, just drop Ice Wall on myself, and they'll instantly pop with through Spark, which will then probably freeze the enemy, and then I can like walk away. I am not running Blink, I'm still running Dodge Roll. I think it's fine. I like Blink, but I just couldn't. I can maybe see it. You can maybe swap Elemental Invocation for Blink. Then you can just get like while you're clearing, and then like for weapon swapping during a boss fight, you can then swap to Blink. Haven't seen the need for it, probably because I've only done the I don't remember. I don't even know what it's called. I've only done the special boss once because I haven't found enough citadels, and I just can't be arsed to do more. I've already done the tier 5 Breachstone before and worked out pretty well, but I'll just show it again just so we can actually kind of see what the build plays like. Other than that, I guess this is kind of like where we're getting a lot of our percent damage because Monk gets so much spirit. This is like 400% spell damage or something. So that's why on our wands and stuff we just want a lot of gain damage as extra, as that'll just give us the most damage. And we also don't want plus level to skills because we can't sustain the mana cost since we're running Archmage. There is a possibility that turning off Archmage in the cast on crit thing and then having plus level to spells might actually be more damage. I have not tested this. POB is not out yet, and I didn't want to spend a bunch of currency to get like a plus wand that ends up basically not working because I can't even keep up with the mana costs because mana cost of skills are just insane. Even this is already genuinely insane. So against bosses you really need to have some way to regenerate your mana, and that's why when I think when we're running the cast on crit setup we have a bunch of extra mana regen. Like our base is 300, and if we put down this and then start casting, we end up at about 580 mana regen per second. If we use a mana flask, it goes up obviously a lot more than that. So yeah, I think I'll just show like the breach now. So, like if you've seen like the tooltip DPS of my Spark, it's quite low. It also does feel quite low, especially in this higher tier content. I just have not found a way yet to get more mana without sacrificing the cast on crit setup. So this is just more or less what it plays like. In the weapon swap for Spark, we're running a lot of extra freeze buildup. We also are running increased, like our blasphemy temp chains is like being buffed by a lot. So here we have another like. There we just weapon swap by casting Winter. Worked out pretty well. The other option would have been to just use Elemental Invocation. Probably would have killed. It's up here. Yeah. Here we can just cast Elemental Invocation. And because we have Impetus, I think we have Impetus? No, I can't remember. Or no, we have Energy Retention on it. There's a high chance we'll be able to immediately cast another Comet afterwards without like losing the energy for it, so you'll be able to immediately cast again. So yeah, I assume Grim Feast is either going to get removed from the game or it's going to be substantially nerfed soon. This is where I think this build can actually kind of shine. You can drop the 10% as extra with the Shock Ground node from Monk and then grab Meditate. So you can still have like, what do you say? But yeah. Anyway, this is a bit closer than I remember it being last time I did it. But, so yeah, you can probably just drop the Shock Ground node. The Shock Ground node is really nice because once you shock a boss, they're basically just perma-shock for the rest of the fight. Because they'll just be shocked. But you can end up, what you can do is just take Meditate instead. You drop the Eternal Youth Keystone. Because, shinies. So probably not even worth taking up anymore. There's probably something down here still, but anyway. So, yeah. You can probably just drop that one shock node and then pick up meditate, and then you can still get the ES overflow. It depends on how they change the mechanic. If they changed it so that overflow is only 1.5 extra ES, then I would still say use critical freeze. Yeah, this is the one main issue with the build, is that against tier 5 bosses, you just don't have the mana to get the full, like, how do you say, the full, like, proc rate. There's probably a much more efficient way of setting this up, but I feel like I feel like there's a pretty convincing boss kill for a pretty homebrew build. I mean, it is inspired obviously by Jung Brone's Eye of Winter cast on crit, but I mean, he basically gave up on the build immediately once it got changed. So, I mean, again, I've probably invested maybe about 50 divines in this build. Maybe, I mean, I think it might be that maybe a bit underselling it. It's probably more than that, but like, these wands, especially this type of wand, is really cheap on the market because there's no plus level, and you don't want plus level because you won't be able to keep up the mana costs. Even now, I can't keep up the mana costs even with how much I regen. Then there's this one. This is only a +3 lightning with a lot of mana, some int. I think this one cost me like 5 div at the time, but you could easily just drop like the 100% increased crit chance, because the crit chance for Spark doesn't matter as much. I mean, it does because you ignore elemental resistance, but that's just against like rares that matter, and rares already don't have a lot of life. This helmet is probably more expensive now because rarity is more important than it was before, but even this isn't. It's not even over 400 ES. So I mean, it's like mid tier, I'd say. These are super expensive if you try to buy them like they are right now. Just buy the ones that are listed for like 1 to 2 EX. And just corrupt them. Put a socket in it. Oh, obviously they have to be 12%. The 12%, only buy the 12% ones for like 1 or 2 EX, and then just slam Vol Orbs until you get at least 14%. It can go up to 15% with the Omen, but I don't think that's worth it. If you're really rich, go ahead, do that, because this is basically, I think when I went from a 12% to a 14%, I got about a 30% more damage boost. So it's pretty big to get these, and it's super cheap. I'd say it's about like 20x to get 2, because you do need 2 of them, because you're using, basically the shield is like, I wish you could actually just set up so you only swap the wand on weapon swap, but you actually have to swap your shield as well, sadly. So you have to have 2 of basically the same shield. This amulet I self-crafted. Just super lucky. I've never seen anything like it on the market. There's probably something that's similar. Like, this has 12% increased maximum mana, which is pretty desired. What you could do, you could go Everlasting Gaze with, I believe, where is it? With Eldritch Battery, and you could probably, you can get like similar. I think I tried it because I have one in my stash, and I have like 3.5k ES instead of 5.5. So I boost about 2,000 ES and gain about 800 mana. And then you don't need this amulet, but again, this is the reason why like the implicit is dog shit. The implicit doesn't do anything for this build, by the way. If I would love this on literally any other base, sadly didn't get it. It didn't drop. I dropped it with percent mana, crit multi, and cast speed, and then slammed everything else. So, pretty lucky, I'd say. I also allocate Subterfuge Mask here for the bunch of evasion rating. If I take this off, I believe I lose I lose only like 7% evasion according to this, but 7% is a lot when you start to get over 50%. Because this makes it from every every 13 out of 20 hits I evade goes to, this is now how do you say, almost 15 out of 20, which is, what is that, about 20% increased hits. I mean, it's a pretty big deal, I'd say. It was also more important when I was running Ghost Dance, but since Grim Feast is so broken, we use Grim Feast. Anything else that matters? Utility Belt is nice because then you get the percent increased gain back instantly. There is another thing here. If I was like level like 97 or something, I would respec into this to give me increased mana recovery rate during Mana Flash. This is really good because it's mana recovery rate and not regeneration rate. It's recovery rate, which is a more multiplier on top of all the mana regeneration that we get. So I guess we can show the, I mean, let's see if I miss any more loot back here first. But yeah, I mean, the fact that we deal so much cold damage that we can basically perma-freeze the boss, more or less, if we're lucky. Like, as you saw, like, in the second, like, part, when they were frozen, they just couldn't do anything. And took about 18 million damage. So, pretty nice. What else? Alright, yeah, we're gonna go into the weapon swap. So again, this is probably super unoptimized, but this is what I thought made the most sense. So while clearing, you notice my mana was never low. Because of these few mana on kill jewels, this already once you start having a substantial mana pool, these will sustain you completely in any content where you're just killing a lot of stuff. So breaches, mapping, Breachstone themselves. It gives you all the mana you need while clearing. So you really, really don't need all this extra mana regeneration right here. So for context, I only have with my Orb of Storms up and moving, I have 368 mana regen. And if I swap to my Eye of Winter, once I get my Arcane Tempo going, I should have about 580. So there's quite a difference, over 200 more mana a second. Doesn't really matter though, because we're proccing, I don't know, it looks like we're proccing maybe, I don't know, maybe like 6-7 comets a second. Hard to tell. I haven't labbed it, and I really just can't be arsed to do so. Okay, let's look at the weapon swap. So we're adding these mana regeneratives and this 15% mana recovery rate, pretty big. This makes a huge difference. Then we had to get a bit more crit multi, crit damage here, more mana regeneration rate here, crit chance, crit multi. Then all of the trigger nodes. At this point, I think maybe getting rid of these 4 points here might actually make it more consistent against bosses. And we could probably, because this is just increased energy, and right now we're already casting more comets than we can sustain. So maybe taking out those 4 points, and maybe, I don't know, maybe these 3 points, and putting them into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Like, this is, by the way, this is really big here. These 6 points, this is 15 crit multi per point, as long as you get to the last point. And minus 20% crit chance, which I already mentioned is overkill at the moment. So that's more or less what we're running on the cast on crit setup, especially on that half of the cast on crit. And then for Spark, we're running mostly just utility. And for the utility part, since we're running Blasphemy, we can do this, increase area curses. This is really important because this AoE here that we get here more or less makes it so our Blasphemy is almost screen wide. It's really hard to tell but it's kind of important because when mobs, especially like delirium mobs, start running at you, you want your curse to apply to them before they get to you, so they're slowed. And then you get the 8% increased. This counteracts a bit of the reduced curse, less curse effect that's on blasphemy itself. Then on top of it, any enemies you have cursed are now hindered. Nice of them. A few nodes over, there's also an increased slow magnitude, which increases how strong our temp chains is and how long they're hindered. And then the last one makes them take 30%, or we do 30% increased damage with hits, as well as having a larger slow magnitude. Feels good. I feel like a lot of this stuff you could just respec it somewhere else. If you feel like you wanted more damage, you could probably just spec it to maybe some lightning nodes, maybe 1, 2, 3. Go into 7 nodes here to get chain, and then drop pierce in the link in this, so you get an extra link in your spark. That's what I originally had, and had extraction on there for the 25% extra as chaos. That's what I originally had, and then I wanted more utility because I was getting stun locked. So then I also went into stun threshold. Again, against bosses, you don't really need anything to help you with your stun threshold, like at all. We do have like one node here that does give us some threshold, so not ultra tiny hits don't stun us still with this. It's not a lot, but it is still something. But against bosses, you're either going to get hit by like some big hit, like I don't know what he's called. I think it's, what is it, Xeshit or something? When his gun cannon, his finger gun, that in the fight you saw that stunned me. And that's because I wasn't running this. If I was running this, I wouldn't have been stunned. But again, it doesn't really matter. This is just nice for mapping, that you just don't get fucking perma-stunned, especially by delirium mobs that you can't hit. GGG, please fix this. Please. It makes delirium so unplayable. Also, senior lacerons are basically impossible unless you have giga damage. Yeah. And then we're also running this to basically be more or less freeze immune. More or less. Again, you get 100% of your maximum energy to this 3 freeze threshold, then with also another 30% increase, so it ends up being 130% of your ES. So ends up being, my freeze threshold ends up being like, I don't know, 7k or something. Don't know exactly what that means, but I notice I just never get frozen anymore even when my charm is like on cooldown. You can probably take this off, but I just think freeze is worse than stun, so I just still keep that on. And finally, because our spark does not have 100% crit, we also run this one here, so that once they're frozen, your hits will ignore their elemental resistances, which is basically the same thing as what this note says, which is critical hits ignore non-negative elementals, which is also why we don't run any exposure or any elemental curses that lower their resistance, because there's just no point, because we don't already ignore all the positive resistance, and if they were negative, we wouldn't ignore that. Like, it wouldn't do anything, because that's just how, like, I mean, if I understand this correctly, from how I understand it, this is basically just says your enemy has 0 res. I'm assuming that if you could lower a monster all the way into the negatives before this applies, then it would not treat it as 0, it would treat it as negative. But at that point, why are we even going this node at all? And it's a lot of investment. We also don't have the skill slots to support it. So we're just not using that. I think you could probably tone down the ES. Probably. You could probably drop like 2,000 ES and still feel fine in most content, and then just spec into more damage. But I just hated dying because it felt so bad, and it still feels really bad. Oh yeah, I forgot, because we're playing Spark, we also want skill effect duration, so we take the skill effect duration wheel up here while we have Spark out. And I think that's everything. Yes. I think that's everything on the tree, more or less explained. Everything else that's taken is just stats. It's just like crit chance, crit multi, nothing special. Int for more mana, energy shield, more spell damage. Yeah. I mean, once POB is out, I'll probably just be able to lab this, get a much better Spark setup, something that's just works better. Other than that, I think most of my gear is pretty... I don't think it's so self-found viable, but at least, like, most of this gear is not very expensive. Everything, I think every piece of gear except for my chest was between 1 and 5 divines. The chest is 15, but I had one with, I think, 100 less ES, and that one was like 1 div, and it had everything on it that I wanted, and all that did was maybe have 60 less spirit, which just made me not able to use elemental invocation, and it made it so you can't run blasphemy when you're using cast on crit, which isn't a big deal. It just makes it so bosses are hitting you at 100% speed when they're not frozen. But I mean, at that point, you're still, again, against anything that isn't the final tier, this doesn't matter. And if you're fighting final tier bosses, you probably have the currency to buy one of these chests, if you know what you're doing. So yeah, this is more or less my build. Tell me what you think. Again, I'll post a max roll planner that just shows what I've taken. I hope it works with weapon swap, but yeah. Bye-bye.